Thank you.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Sir Edward, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I echo the congratulations to the member for Carshalton and Wallington on securing this debate, and also pay tribute to those petitioners who also contributed towards those petitions being included in this. After enduring so many months of hardship, it is certainly good today to be able to rise, having heard some positive news yesterday around the possibility of a breakthrough in finding a vaccine. Very early days, of course, but if it meets its promises, it will still be a long time before the impact gives the much-needed shot in the arm to the beleaguered high streets around the country, to the shops, the hotels, pubs, restaurants, warehouses, theatres, stadiums, offices and the businesses of all shapes and sizes across the UK. The crisis drags on, and battle-weary SMEs that would normally be driving our economy have been almost driven into the ground. But at least we'd have this glimmer of light in a winter gloom, that there may be a solution on the horizon that will keep many of them from giving up the ghost altogether. There is plenty of reason for the government not to give up on these businesses. The skilled and dedicated SMEs will turbocharge the UK's recovery if we can get them through to the other side of the crisis. The first crucial step was certainly welcome in extending the furlough scheme and the self-employed support scheme for 5 months, albeit belatedly. And of course, it would have been helpful if that announcement hadn't been made so late in the day, and it might have prevented some of the job losses that we have actually seen as a result. But with the Brexit negotiations, we have seen that the government has a habit of sometimes leaving these things to last-minute chaos. Prior to the announcement, devolved governments and local administrations in the north of England had been crying out for expansion for the levels of support which were so desperately needed to protect jobs. I still can't understand why these calls fell on deaf ears, yet when a lockdown was announced for the south of England, a far more generous 80% furlough package was suddenly made available again. I'm sure this is just coincidence, I'm absolutely sure of that, but while it's better late than never, the Scottish Government's public health policies should not have to be hindered in this way. And while furlough extension is essential, the second wave will hit far harder than the first, and it's only part of the solution. Many SMEs are so heavily reliant on this golden quarter to balance their books, so the lockdown is crippling cash flow and it will feed in well into next year. The need for tough pandemic restrictions is devastating, particularly to the hospitality sector and its employers, as was so well outlined by the Honourable Member for Strangford. It's necessary, but that doesn't make it any easier for these businesses. Prior to the second lockdown, the Q2 GDP data showed that a 20% decline of the UK economy, yet for the hospitality sector this was around 85%, and only 7% of businesses surveyed by Hospitality UK were actually feeling in any way confident going into the new year. Many SMEs have had very few good trading days over the last 8 months. In events, some businesses are operating at only 5% of turnover or less. SMEs have already used up the rainy day resources and built up debt from the government-backed loans where they could get one, and we've heard some of the issues around that already this afternoon. They're now worried about how to pay non-staff costs and how much of the big-ticket grants announcements will actually reach them once it's spread out across all of other businesses. It was good to see the live event sector get a specific mention in the £1.1 billion additional support allocated to councils in England to support businesses, and with the Barnett consequentials associated with that for devolved governments. But it's a widely shared pot allocated at £20 per head, and the devil will be in the detail of its distribution. I also welcome the £2.38 billion provided by the Scottish Government to support businesses, including the £48 million fund for employers and businesses impacted by recent restrictions. The monthly grant support coming back with the ongoing 5-level tier framework and the £11 million contingency fund recently announced for business, including nightclubs and soft play who'd missed out on other supports. I realise this won't make up for lost revenue at this time, but the Scottish Government lacks the big economic levers and borrowing powers it needs and is making the best of the resources it has at its disposal. I look forward to a day when we don't need to have this debate anymore, when bad karaoke is back in the pubs and live gatherings can get going again with all the disparate jobs that they support, from lighting technicians and musicians to planners, caterers and technology manufacturers. Events support around 1 million jobs, and when able to, they run and contribute billions to the economy every year. It's perhaps because they don't fit neatly into the existing categorisations that the sector has been missed out so much in the targeted support so far. The We Make Events campaign have very helpfully suggested sector-specific measures to help the industry survive, such as government-backed insurance scheme to ensure organisers can recover costs if a lockdown happen. During a previous debate I led on this topic, the Minister did agree that the UK Government was willing to engage with the campaign, although I have to say no meeting has yet been arranged. So I would invite the Minister again today to see what can be done to move that forward. We do also need to look at the replacements for the COVID business interruption loan scheme. We had a lengthy debate on that in the Chamber just last week, so in avoidance of going over the old ground again, I won't repeat too many of those points, but I think it's very clear that members from all sides of the Chamber do recognise the need to look in at a level of detail at a number of issues associated with those loans, and certainly would far rather, from my point of view, see these as being grants. And again, I would make the suggestion perhaps that it would be far more sensible to write off these debts for struggling SMEs and look at more innovative grant and equity-based solutions to stimulate the economy as we go forward.
We agree on a lot, but we differ on this point. How would it be fair to write off that kind of debt and make them grants when some businesses haven't taken a loan and other businesses will pay back those loans? How fair would it be to those businesses, and how fair would it be to the taxpayers who funded those loans?
I hear the point that the other gentleman made. We did have an exchange on this on Thursday. But we're in a situation just now where the current system isn't fair. There are millions of people getting no support whatsoever, and we actually need to do whatever we can do to make sure that our high streets aren't utterly decimated when we get to this, at the end of this pandemic. And I would suggest that that's one measure that could be taken that would absolutely guarantee the future of these businesses. We then could look at those running small businesses from their homes, be it swimming instruction or travel agents who rely on activities that aren't currently available to the extent they were before, or those who don't rely on large gatherings. And here I would like to draw mention to the Showman's Guild, who have effectively been closed down for a year, but because they operate from their home, they have not qualified for any support so far. There's vast numbers of individuals and households and businesses who've seen their income falling perhaps by 100% in some situations. They're at risk of losing their homes and they can't get the support they need. Why is the government not wrapping their arms around them? Why is their plight still being ignored? It is an unedifying consequence of this virus that the privileged members of a government can determine which businesses are viable, what cultural events are important to save, and who gets support through a crisis, or who should simply retrain in cyber. This is an emergency, and we need to make sure the lifeline is available to all those who need it, not just those who fit the moulds of support schemes that were created hastily. I do look forward to the day when SMEs can just get on with it again and think of their business rather than having to think about what support's available. But that's a long way off yet, and as we focus our collective efforts on following guidance to drive down the virus, the government must make sure the measures in place to protect jobs and businesses while we all look to save lives.